And the dog wants me to throw a ball. Okay, we're going to go live. So here we are. Hi, this is Matthew Holt. You are listening to THCB Gang. It's episode 58. The date is June the 17th, 2021. It's been a big day in health policy for what didn't happen. Thank heavens. And I have a great lineup of guests. Finally, I've got one where the Y chromosomes are outnumbered now, always out fast, but now finally outnumbered. All right. Who are we on today? Well, the token other Y chromosome belongs to Jeff Goldsmith, Health Futures Inc. We have Lygeia Ricciardi. Lygeia has got a new company called Ada Rose. She's going to tell us all about. Rosemarie Day from Day's Health Strategies in Boston, and Jane Sarasohn-Kahn, my good friend who has been away from the gang for far too long. So that's who we have. We are now live streaming. Everyone's here. And I guess the big story is the thing that didn't happen this morning. The Supreme Court says the Affordable Care Act is still up and running and standing. And given your work on this, Rosemarie, over the years, I want to give you the first word. Then we'll go around and ask everyone else what they're up to and what they've been seeing.
You stole my thunder, Matthew. But
I suspect a few more people have heard about it. I've lost $100, by the way, on the gambling of how many of what the vote was going to be. I said it was going to be 6-3, but in fact it was 7-2. So I've lost $100 to Margaret Gurley. She said it was going to be 9-0. So
Well, who did you put on the other side? Who would have been on the?
I thought it was going to be Alito and Thomas. Thomas was one that surprised me, and I thought there was a good chance that all three of the newbies, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett, were going to vote it down. But obviously, Roberts took them in the back room and beat them senseless with a piece of stick, and maybe noted that the Koch brothers didn't care as much about this as they may do. So we'll see. Anyway, why am I taking your thunder? You tell me what you think.
Well, I wanted to say this was the shot heard around the world, hopefully around the country. It is amazing how many near-death experiences the ACA has had, both, across all dimensions of government, whether it's the courts, the legislature, or administratively. Maybe this one wasn't as close to death, but I never take anything for granted on this stuff. So Larry Levitt from Kaiser Family Foundation said the key word here is resilience. I love that word. And the ACA has stood the test of time, honestly. And I think given the pandemic and all the issues around that, it absolutely makes no sense, even for the diehards who were opposed to the ACA, for them to go after it yet again. And if they did, there wouldn't be any standing. So this was a really big day. You said for what didn't happen. I want to put it in the positive. What did happen is that 31 million people who've been covered by the ACA will maintain their coverage, and those who are going to continue needing it, and that could be any of us at any time, will have it.
Fabulous. Jeff, you've been commenting on this stuff for a couple of years. What do you think?
I don't know a single person of any political persuasion that thought this was going to be killed. Not one. So I think this was sort of a giant political anticlimax. I will say there's unfinished business here, and Congress is in the process of figuring out how to address it. And that is for the 12 states or 13 states that still haven't expanded. It's time to get real about this. On the flip side, I dug up Medicaid enrollment numbers for a presentation I gave yesterday. And believe it or not, we're close to an 80 million person Medicaid program without those 12 states or 13 states. So 1 in 4 Americans is on Medicaid. A big chunk of that came in the ACA expansion. So I'm a little concerned.
Isn't it 50% of births now? It's amazing. I think it's half of all births, I believe, are paid for by Medicaid.
No, that's consistent with what I've seen. But I think this is not a stable situation to have a quarter of the population of the US dependent on the vagaries of the state legislatures and the managed care companies that control 80% of those 80 million people. So I think kind of moving on beyond the great big non-surprise we got this morning is, what can we do to stabilize this program and get the right balance between private sector and public sector effort in covering people?
Yeah, and Jeff, as you pointed out on that PBS special about hospitals the other day, this isn't a question of, good versus bad versus whatever. This is a question of geography and inputs to the system, right? And we've got a long way to go there. Jane.
Yeah, I mean, to Rosemarie's point, resilience, she is the ACA. To Jeff's point, a lot more work to do, and we have to stay vigilant and work toward health citizenship for all people in America, at least health coverage for everybody as a civil right. And I think we're starting to see people understanding that through the pandemic, that there is a thing called public health and we're all connected. And, in the margins, little by little by little, more and more people are starting to understand that. So that's where I'm coming down on this. And to your point, Matthew, about the 7-2, I thought it might have been a different 2 or 3 or 4 as well. I think Amy was a surprise on that vote for me. But, I have a husband who is tied to Notre Dame through his education, even though he's a pro-choice Catholic. And he knows a lot about Barrett from his alumni work at Notre Dame. And man, I was surprised. So brava, Amy, today, anyway.
Well, good. Lygeia, you've had I don't want to add about this. You also had a pretty interesting week professionally with some new stuff going on. So tell me what you've been up to.
Yeah, so for those of you who've known me for a while, you know that for the last 10 to 20 years, I've been really obsessed with supporting consumers and patients using digital health. And that has carried through every job I've had in the private sector and the public sector. Most recently, I've started building a company. It's called Ada Rose, and it's named after my daughter because I'm really reflecting the things that I'm seeing in my own life. And what I'm trying to do is reach women, particularly women over about 35 who tend to be in that sandwich generation, who are dealing with so much in terms of managing the health and wellness of their families. And this ties right back into that conversation about the ACA and about the pandemic. Women are harder hit than anyone else. I'm trying to make their lives easier by leveraging technology. I will add, I am still advising and working with Carium, which I love, which is also supporting patient and consumer interests, though more directly with the system. I'm going direct to consumer and currently providing information and resources and figuring out a variety of other services that I'm considering.
That's exciting. I'm glad you'll keep us in touch. And those of you who want to go to adarose.com will see Lygeia's first couple of writings about what's going on, some definitions of stuff and some phrases and concepts in digital health to help. And she's asked for a bit of advice about that. But I think the ones you've done so far have been really good. So cool. I'll just add the one thing I saw, which I picked up last week, was there was a really big study in, it wasn't in JAMA, it was a JAMA, I think it was the open network version of JAMA, in which there was a multi-thousand person survey looking at experiences between employer-based health insurance and Medicare. And I wasn't that surprised that Medicare was preferred by its recipients and employer-based health insurance was by its recipients, because there's been a lot of data over the years that the recipients of Medicare really like it. But what might be more interesting was that basically every measure, employer-based health insurance didn't do as well as Medicaid. It did either as badly, which was really quite, so I put a little bit of tidbits about that and linked to that on the blog today. But, there is still, we're seeing in the private sector and in the digital health sector, we don't have Jess DeMaster on today, so the power of Jess. There's a lot going on still in terms of people developing direct-to-consumer tools, services, and integrated healthcare system, integrated healthcare services, direct-to-consumer. You're seeing just in the last few days, more huge rounds. One for Brightline, a company which I'm a member, patient, user of, payer for, I guess, consumer, doing direct-to-consumer child behavioral health. Another one for a company called the Pill Club, which is pretty famous. It sells the pill, and others. And we've seen, massive growth in all of these types of direct-to-consumer activities, which sort of plays into what you're talking about, Lygeia, but also suggests that as these companies get better funded, there may be some growth in these sort of virtual clinics. And I had a very interesting, I had a very interesting conversation with a venture capitalist. I was trying to sell him one of the companies I work with, which provides tools to doctors and hospitals. And he basically said, it seems to be easier these days just to employ your own doctors and hospitals and build your own vertical solution set rather than sell to to go do the whole work of going and selling the doctors, because then you can get on the health plans. You don't have to go and sell to the health plan. You can just become a provider to them and try to get a network with them. And I think that, that the whole ethos of, are we building a new health system versus, just keeping going with the one we have and adding new technology to it, and how does that wrap into all the stuff we've been talking about on the policy front? That's going to continue to be very interesting. I know that several of you on this call are sort of in this session are very close to that. So that's my general piece. So with that, let's dive a bit more into this issue of what Jeff raised in terms of stabilizing Medicaid. I mean, we mentioned that a quarter of Americans are now on Medicaid. A lot of births are happening on Medicaid. I don't know how that translates to how many people are going to stay on Medicaid and how it gets expanded. But and we're also, there was some, it looks like there was some notion in the, although I haven't heard much about it, in some of the Senate markups of the next round of the spending bill, that this reduction of Medicare age down to 60, maybe even below, maybe starting to come up again. Where do we think this is heading? So Jeff, Rosemarie, give me a sense about where you think we're going to be in a few years, or what do you think we need to deal with to get to where we need to go?
We know, Matthew, your comment about employer-based insurance not polling as well as Medicaid, I mean, it should be pretty bloody obvious why that is. Medicaid has the broadest benefit package of any form of health coverage. And it doesn't chisel people every time they need health care. And it doesn't expose them to massive patient cost sharing that they don't have the money to pay for. So I don't think that poll finding that you cited is surprising at all. But as far as Medicaid is concerned, I mean, one great big piece of the stalled infrastructure package is expanding the non-medical side of the service benefit that Medicaid provides to cover home and community-based services, which are a gaping hole, and that directly address a lot of the social determinants of health, a lot of the burdens on women that Lygeia talked about earlier. And it's that piece of Obama's package, or excuse me, of Biden's package is in limbo right now. The Republicans don't consider it infrastructure. It's absolutely infrastructure in the same sense that a safety net is infrastructure. And if I'm to criticize the Bidens, I think, they get a lot of strokes for putting this out there. They get a D- for selling it. I don't think the typical American, there's 80 million people on Medicaid. There's a huge number of those folks that can't get their loved ones or themselves into home and community-based services. There's a 900,000 person waiting list for those things. And in states that have skinny Medicaid programs, that's a huge chunk of the population. So I think that, Biden, he hasn't talked about it as a Medicaid expansion because Medicaid has got an image problem. And it's tied up in a lot of the racist, the systemic racism issues that we're separately exploring. There's a lot to be done here.
So thank you, Jeff, for raising that, because I think that integrates a lot of the caregiving issues that we've been alluding to, and is this huge systemic missing piece, and it's more acutely felt in those states that have skinny Medicaid programs. I'm going to go back to just kind of the basics of healthcare coverage itself. So the fact that there are in 12 states that have still not expanded Medicaid, and most of those are in the South. remains a huge problem. And we've talked about it in this gathering before, but it bears repeating. When you look at voter suppression and who's benefiting from Republican control of state legislatures, it's not the people who need Medicaid. And it is a crying shame that the Medicaid program was designed to be a joint state and federal program, which I believe in theory, except for that there continue to be these states that truly undercut their own citizens. And I do think it's a vestige of, frankly, slavery and institutional racism that continues to this day. So while in theory, I like the fact that states can have control, because I'm in a state like Massachusetts that does some really cool things with the control that it has, but it skews to the creative, expansive, let's do these things and try and solve a whole bunch of problems using the same federal dollar. That's super fun for people like me that love a policy sandbox. But it's the opposite in states that are just grinding their folks, into the ground by not giving them basic healthcare coverage. And I'm looking at you, Texas and Florida, especially because of how big your populations are and how many of the people who are actually working in healthcare. Speaking of home and community-based waivers, it's the very caregivers who are coming in and taking care of our elderly and our disabled who do not have the Medicaid coverage. And that is it's insane, it's unjust, it's unethical, it's everything. So Medicaid expansion in those 12 states is vital, and that is a huge missing step. I think that there's a lot of money on the table to incent those states to, and we're not seeing much movement. So I don't.
The two states that you named, Rosemarie, are also disproportionately lagging in recovering from this pandemic. They had the most fiscal problems. Texas and Florida had huge gaps in state revenues. So it isn't just ideology. It isn't just systemic racism. There's a lot of issues about the resources. And of course, the expansion in the Medicaid match that was intended to tide us over during this pandemic expires in 2022. So it's not like there's some kind of, generous federal assistance for doing this under the current law. The other thing to say is, before Obamacare, the states that you're talking about had percentages of eligible people under the old program actually enrolled under 50%. Under 50%. Obamacare didn't help them at all, because they were eligible before and they weren't eligible for the enhanced match that Medicaid provided. or Obamacare provided. I realize we're getting ultra wonky here, but these states have hammered people of color, hammered them by not providing them access to care.
Also, and I know, it's a fun thing at the other end of the economic spectrum to talk about, oh my goodness, look how expensive California is. People are fleeing to places like Texas in order to, have a lower cost of living. It's going to be interesting, I think, when they realize that also means there's a whole lot fewer services and safety net, that there's a cost to that lower cost of living, a social cost. And I just think there's gonna have to be some rebalancing. Ultimately, it's just not gonna happen fast enough for my taste.
I think it's worth mentioning, coming to you, Jane, just real quick. The other thing is really hurts is rural hospitals in the southern states, right, who depend on Medicaid. And there was at one point in North Carolina, which I think has made a move towards, did North Carolina actually now expand Medicaid? I forget. But they had a Democratic government. There was at one point a Republican, talking in a town somewhere, talking about his local how they should do the Medicaid expansion, because the local hospital, which by the way covers everybody who lives in that local area, not just the Medicaid people, was going to go under and needed the money from Medicaid. Anyway, Jane, sorry, interrupted.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, tagging off of what Rosemarie was talking about, and then from Jeff, is I've mapped a lot of the social determinants of health by state where the health risks are. And if you look at map after map, whether it's obesity and smoking and lower spending on education, lower spending on social care, as Jeff was talking about earlier, it's roughly the same states that we're talking about. They're of more color. they don't devote as much to care, the caring economy. So when I'm, I have a European passport through Italy. And so I spend a lot of time looking at health systems over there, and we spend inverse on medical care versus social care. We're the only developed country that is topsy-turvy that way. If we just put that lens on, we could get better over it'll take a generation or two because we have to catch up, but it's the same real problem. I mean, we're talking about, lots of parallels, but it's the same thing. It's the same map. And that's what frustrates me so much, because to Jeff's point, we got to sell this, but we have to explain why this is the way it is. And we haven't done that as elegantly as we might.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of mutual friends in common. One of them is Alexandra Drain. And Alex has been on a crusade to get political and social recognition for the 40 some odd million people, mostly women, but not exclusively women, that are caregivers. And between the initiatives to expand, universal pre-K, to expand daycare, and the stuff that's in that home and community-based services, I mean, it plugs two gigantic holes in the safety net that people are falling through and ending up in the medical care system. And then we get beaten up for having high healthcare costs. So they've got a lot on their plate. They're inherently modest. They're not arrogant like the Obama people. They're very practical, thoughtful, methodical folks, but they have the same damned blind spot about not being able to communicate to people how what they're trying to do is going to help them. They kind of assume it's self-evident, and it's really going to hurt because they're not going to have the votes to do it if they don't put it across in a more convincing and persuasive way.
So let's discuss that number of the votes, right? Because part of the issue here is Manchin and obviously the voter expansion. HR1, I don't forget the name of the act, but the voting act, which he said he's going to come out against. There's been a lot of obviously criticism of him from moderate left Democrats on this. Obviously, it's better to have him there as a Democrat than it is to have him as a Republican, which is it's not unknown that the fate of the Senate can shift based on if you remember Jeffords from 20 years ago, 2018. 20 years ago, or was it 19 years ago, shifted from being a Republican to being a Democrat, and actually, among other things, saved the California electricity economy because it turned over whatever the commission, I think the name of the commission, which deals with electricity, it got to the Democrats, so we stopped the craziness that was going on in California 20 years ago. We were having power cuts. So there are real effects from this, and obviously a Senate run by Mitch McConnell is very different than a Senate run by Chuck Schumer, whether or not we get this passed. But what's your sense? What's our group collective sense about what might get passed in this infrastructure act, and what Manchin might be able to, what might come through the negotiations, what we might at least get 51 votes for?
I mean, the obvious stuff, roads and bridges, which are falling apart, broadband access for rural areas, which of course would disproportionately benefit a huge chunk of those places that you were talking about a moment ago. Electrical charging stations, people are kind of wondering whether that's infrastructure or not. I haven't followed this all that closely because I've been fixated on the stuff we've been talking about, which is the safety net stuff. Right. But the problem is, what the Republicans are doing is daring the Democrats to put it on the tab, so they can come back in 18 months and cut it because of the horrendous deficit that the Democrats ran up. So that's the real game that's going on here, is not being willing to pay for any of it. How much can we dig out of the $6 trillion that we threw at the pandemic and repurpose to do this? I mean, that's the game that's being played right now. So the real question is, how much expansion of federal revenues is going to be possible with 50 votes, right? and I, man, I kind of get Manchin's problem. Trump won his state by 27%. So it's not like he has all that many degrees of freedom. I mean, he's not up until, what is it, 2024? He's got 3 more years on his term, but he barely won the last time he ran. And I mean, maybe it's, time for him to retire. I don't know what's going to happen to infrastructure, Matthew.
It's time to get Stacey Abrams mobilizing in West Virginia.
In West Virginia, lots of luck with that.
You say that, Rosemary, but I mean, I look at this. Jane mentioned Europe. I, as you know, came from a country which used to be in Europe and has now moved further offshore. And
Sadly,
been crazy. But if you look at it, I mean, you look at the hard politics of the UK, where the Conservative Party is veering to be very close to what the Republican Party is here, which is basically an ethnic white nationalist party, rather than as it used to be an upper class party, with the Labour Party there being the working class party. So reflecting in some ways that what's happened here. And don't forget, the Democrats now are this weird, unwieldy alliance of upper class, well-educated, college-educated liberals, kind of like the 5 of us on this call. I won't call you a liberal, Jeff, but the rest of us, with a large, with the sort of the large minority, ethnic minority populations, across the South. And if you look at what sort of held Georgia together and the alliance that just about won Biden the election, it's close. And in some states, you just don't have that. I mean, West Virginia doesn't have the numbers like that. So what I think has to happen, is that you have to have what Jeff suggested, a really, really good explanation of why nuts and bolts and money and economics of this really matter to people who otherwise ideologically, are going to vote Republican, because that's the sort of the ethnic.
Yeah. One of the big problems is that people aren't really serious about understanding policy. I mean, I live in Washington, D.C., and we tend to assume here that everybody cares, but most people don't. And so we keep coming at things. I mean, even the most obvious example recently has been, vaccination and the virus and whether you wear masks or not. You would think it was just a matter of let's explain it and everyone will do what makes sense, but it's not. It's not about just explaining things. It's about tapping into empathy, human connection, anger, this kind of tribalism that we have. Trump, for all of his awfulness, is incredibly skilled and able to do that and to manipulate people and their feelings. Right. I would love to see some leadership that's more on the Democratic side, that without having some of those qualities that are manipulative, is nonetheless able to tap into people in a less sort of abstract sense and catch the core, the gut, and mobilize people and help them understand what actually is good for them as individuals and the country. Because a lot of people vote for Trump or vote or support the Republican Party when it is actually hurting them worst of all. That is the part that is hard for us to get through our heads. So, we just need a different approach of communicating.
But
I have two quick things to say about the vaccine. One is that Charles Gabber, who has a great Twitter account worth following, has done this massive range of charts looking at vaccine adoption versus voting. And it's by county. California is phenomenal. Where I live, Marin County, which was 90% voted for Biden, it's 90% vaccinated. And Lassen County out in the sticks and in the foothills, which is Trump country, is 20% voted for Biden and 20% vaccinated. So the line is completely, like that for sort of policies and vaccinations. And then Tuesday, California lifted its mask mandate. Decided Gavin Newsom, the government, says it's fine. Everything is open fully. There's no restrictions. I went into Trader Joe's, a supermarket, a grocery store here in San Francisco yesterday. I didn't wear a mask. Every single member of staff, every single person shopping was wearing a mask. I said to the guy who was telling me which line to go into to buy my to buy the stuff I was buying, and I said, do you guys, have I missed it? Is there still a policy you have to wear a mask? And he went, no, it's just personal preference. So apparently people in California and San Francisco are just going to keep wearing a mask, even though we're at 80% vaccination and well past herd immunity. So that's it. Anyway, Jane, sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, so that you're channeling something I was going to talk about. So that's the Trader Joe's demographic, because where I am in suburban Philadelphia, same thing here. What I was going to say before, to Lygeia's point, it's a matter of trust. Who do you trust? And trust, and we know from the Edelman Trust Survey, year after year after year, the last 5 years, trust in government down, trust in media down, except if you love Fox, you love Fox, you love MSNBC, you love MSNBC. So it's the bubble. But who is trusted? I heard Alex Drain's American Telemedicine Association conversation with Marcus Osborne today from Walmart. Walmart, for Walmart customers, is trusted. So we are seeing in real time this growth of retail health, where Walmart is taking advantage of that. Amazon, for people who trust Amazon, they'll go through employers, whatever, through enterprises. But I think this is retail health's opportunity. I'm not saying this is optimal and health consumerism, we can argue about that, but this is this chasm that's being filled now because of trust. So, and Walmart's even offering with its vaccines QR codes and electronic vaccine passports, which is really cool because, the state of Pennsylvania didn't offer that to me. So I got to find one. But in any case, I think that is this gap that will be filled with people who are uninsured, underinsured, and don't trust, Nordstrom.
Nordstrom's still in business? I didn't know.
Actually, I live by the biggest mall in the country now, King of Prussia, because they joined 2 malls. We got COVID testing and COVID vaccinations all over the mall. It's amazing what's going on. I'm sure around DC, it's the same thing.
And we do have the Trader Joe's phenomenon as well, by the way. And I take part in that too. And I just do it for other people's comfort. If I'm like, well, if you're nervous or whatever, I'm happy to do this. No problem.
Yeah, I do it because I don't trust my fellow citizens to take care of themselves. I'm a little bit less sort of.
Well, I do it also because, honestly, among other things, I have an 11-year-old. She's not vaccinated. Yeah. There are other people who are not vaccinated for very good reasons.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, let's just push on that one a little bit, right? Which is the idea of where do we get to this herd immunity? So we have, as far as I see, 2 problems. One is the understanding of what happens, especially with the Delta variant, which is, again, coming from the UK, came from India to the UK. The UK did not shut down in time. The UK went back into a partial lockdown. Interesting enough, they exempted Wembley Stadium, which is where the England soccer team is currently playing in the European Championships. We're playing Scotland on Friday, so tomorrow morning. So luckily, this is I would not be paying too much attention to what I'm doing on Friday between 12 noon. But the rest of it's a serious issue, right? They've done vaccinations via their GPs because they do have primary care. Here we've done it through public health. Interesting enough, Jane, you mentioned there is no California passport, and I've tried to get through Clear, which does the airport ones, because one of the conferences coming up, I think it's HLTH, said they would use the Clear passport. You have to have that. I've tried to access my vaccine record, and it can't be done. They can go off and look for vaccine records of providers, but no one seems to have figured out how to get to the public health agencies or wherever the hell the record was from the vaccine that I had in a big parking lot in a ferry terminal in Marin. So, there's stuff going on there with it, but what do we think people are going to do in terms of when are you ever going to stop wearing a mask in a public place? If you're concerned either about other people or about yourself or about your kids, because it is true we're not yet at the point where we've got a vaccine for kids. It's in trials, but it's not yet. And also, we're still at the point where there are patches of the country, maybe it's rural counties or wherever, where we're at incredibly low vaccination rates, which is just bizarre. And they're trying to do, they're giving away millions of dollars in lottery tickets and whatever else, to do this. But I'm just wondering, do we get back to a place where we are normal and don't wear masks and we're back at big outdoor gatherings, or are many, many people going to stay concerned? What do you think, Lygeia? What do you think, Jeff? Where are you going to be on this issue?
I do wonder if there will be maybe a little bit more like somewhere like Japan, situations in which people are more comfortable masking, like public transport, packed metros, that kind of thing. That would actually make a ton of sense. Forget coronavirus, like the flu. One of the silver linings of this whole last year was no one got the flu or a cold.
No flu.
It just kind of didn't exist, which was fabulous. I think it's sort of a social cues thing, honestly. I mean, it's sort of what again, right now I'm doing it to be, when I'm outside and I feel like things are pretty safe for myself and my family, I am being thoughtful of other people who are worried for whatever reason. And as I said, I am concerned for my own kid, and I am limiting or keeping on with the behaviors that we had before most of my family was vaccinated. I don't want her to be eating inside. I won't put her on an airplane yet.
Right.
Yeah, and to be fair, in the UK, by the way, schools stayed open a lot longer through this. There was some homeschooling, but they opened up back, and they have not enforced. They didn't enforce masks in schools because they felt that kids weren't likely to spread it. And the Delta variant apparently it's been pretty heavily spread by young people. Now, it's at much lower levels of hospitalization and deaths. I mean, way lower. They were down at 0 deaths at one point, and they have relatively good vaccination rates, but they were also leaving a long time between the first and second vaccine for the AstraZeneca vaccination. And, we've been using mostly Pfizer here. And they've started now using Pfizer for the younger people, but people over 40 or 45 are using AstraZeneca now. But
Matthew,
back and forth, we have an issue. Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, this is not an academic issue for me, because on Monday morning, I'm flying out to Missoula, Montana, to keynote the Montana Hospital Association. And guess what? Montana is one of those states where people didn't believe in this pandemic. They didn't mask during the pandemic, and they're not getting vaccinated. So it's sort of like, okay, what do I do? I'm going to be hard pressed to wear a mask in the social functions. I'm going to be outside a lot, going river rafting. I don't need a mask for that. And I'm not going to be masked when I'm giving my talk. But geez, I think there is going to be a huge variation in regional risk around the country.
Yeah.
And social pressure surrounding that risk, either denying it or trying to manage it effectively. We've talked about this in previous sessions. This isn't a country, guys. It's about 10 countries.
Yeah.
Yes.
3 of them never bought this whole pandemic thing.
Can I just bring up a weird ethical thing that's come up among those of us with 5th graders, which is there's a lot of freedom right now in that you don't have to show whether you're vaccinated or not. There's this question of, we have 11-year-olds. Some of them may be a healthy weight of many 12 or 13-year-olds. Is it okay to vaccinate your 11-year-old? Should you lie? What if you think that's the safest thing for them? Right. So that's kind of a touchy issue and an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, on the issue of, do you have to show it and what can you enforce? It's worth noticing that, one of the hardest hit industries was the cruise industry. If it disappeared, I wouldn't be politically upset because, it's a pretty horrible industry for what it does to the world. But ignoring all that ethical stuff about the ethics of cruises, in Florida, there's now a state law saying you cannot ask people about, a business cannot ask whether you're vaccinated or not. $5,000 fine per time you ask somebody. Carnival Cruises says you have to get vaccinated to come on board, and they're about to ship out of Miami. So I mean, how that plays out, between the politics of the DeSantis folks and and the businesses who cannot afford to have an outbreak on their, they just can't financially afford to have another big outbreak on one of their cruise lines, given what happens. I don't know.
I think this is one of those industries whose nursing homes would be another one whose image has been permanently damaged by this pandemic. There's a whole bunch of people that won't go within a country mile of one of those places, regardless of what DeSantis permits them to do or not. Yeah. So, I mean, if I were an executive of one of those places, and one of my neighbors actually was an executive of a cruise line, they're going to have to bend over backwards to convince people that it's safe to come on those giant floating petri dish things that they've been operating.
Well, I mean, they actually had one in. They had a situation, and this does happen, right? They had a situation in one that they got going in. I think it was Carnival got going, selling out somewhere in the Caribbean, And it actually had, even though I think everyone was vaccinated, they did have some people who tested positive. And then if you think about it, you've had the New York Yankees, who still get tested even though they're all vaccinated, were vaccinated with the J&J, and there was a study where it showed that there were a number of positive cases amongst the baseball team. And it was a relatively low number. It was the number you would have expected or calculated, given that it's a 70% prevention rate for that vaccine rather than the sort of 95 for the Pfizer or Moderna. And I was on a Clubhouse chat, and I spoke briefly with the president of Moderna, and I said to him, so what did you expect when you went to that meeting? You were told the numbers by the FDA people who were reporting about. What did you say? He said, I would have been delighted with 80. The fact that we got 95 was just incredible. But we've still got a whole way to go. And by the way, the world is kind of opening back up anyway, even though a lot of places are not so far along. I mean, literally we're watching this European Soccer Championships where the Hungarians, another of these countries which has basically gone to the ultra right, decided to have no social distancing, and they let 65,000 people come to their stadium. And the English are allowing, there will be social distancing. I mean, they're like the stadium's going to be half full or whatever for the upcoming games. And then you've got the Olympics happening, right? Where, okay, the Japanese are not going to get foreign tourists in, but you're going to have people from 180 countries or whatever, all mixing together. And a lot of those countries are developing nations where maybe they haven't got access to vaccine. I mean, who knows, right? You've got this emblematic of the world opening back up when we are a long, long way from being done.
Right. So I think, responsible leaders, whether they're public leaders or they lead companies in the private sector, are going to have to be very, have their radar, their data. And we have all developed a lot of practices around masking, around Zoom calls, or contingency planning, all of these things we've had to do. We're discussing, are we going back to work fully or hybrid? What does that look like? There's, I was speaking with the head of innovation at a very big firm based in Kendall Square, and she was saying, I'm not even talking about innovation. I am just working on the return to work policy and the are we hybrid or what? So a lot of mental energy has been devoted to this, and new muscles have been developed, which I think, again, responsible leaders will be able to deploy should a variant arise that is more dangerous. We have to be watching the data and be vigilant. I'd like for most people to be able to relax a little more and kind of unlearn some of the paranoia. Like I know even with my own staff, there's been a range of folks and how they feel, but once they kind of realize, oh, I didn't get infected, I'm okay. Like they have to kind of, kind of zen themselves into, I can come out now. So there's some of that, but I really think leadership is going to have to make kind of virus monitoring just like part of your dashboard of how you're conducting, how you're planning, whether you're convening people, all of that, and have contingency plans, because we are not out of this, and we are an international community. It's not just the US is interdependent, and that's where it's great to see the Biden leadership and others in the G7 saying we're going to give vaccines to other countries, because that's real. And we are a global community, and we are not out of this together. And especially as, Americans think, wow, I can get back on planes. I can get on cruise ships. I'm going to go here, there, and everywhere, yikes. So we're going to have to stay on top of this. And we're not really going to get to go back. Leadership. I mean, I know there's people who want to party this summer, like, it's 1999, whatever the song was.
Yeah, you got it.
They're geared up to do it, and they're going to go do that, and they're not going to have to think about it. But leaders have got to continue thinking about this always.
And I think Rosemarie, right? Go ahead. Business is being trusted. Our employer is the most trusted person now for COVID information for lots of people. Again, looking at the Edelman data. But Rosemarie's right, because part of business now entering the new ESG era for environmental, social, and governance. The S in societal responsibility is really coming out in COVID, and all the big companies, whether it's the big banks or manufacturing or other big companies, are doing what Rosemarie's talking about at the C-suite, really being mindful and designful about how the reentry is going to go, because they got one shot. to do it right. So some companies are going really slowly, and some companies are, saying 50% one week, 50% the next week. But I think this is where the trust is right now on COVID information for a lot of people, listening to my employer through the pandemic. And now it's their trust to lose now, Rosemarie, because the leadership really wants to do right by their employees right now, particularly because it's a tight labor market now.
Right.
Yeah, I saw an interesting. Well, part of the Venrock, the venture capital company, does a survey which they sent out a bunch of people. I answered it among others, and there was a question about whether the kind of investor health tech, innovation group that they survey, which is obviously not a sample of regular people. It's weirdos like me, and probably I don't know if you answered that, Jane, or one of you were in the group, but. The interesting thing was they asked whether home testing, especially home testing and regular testing of COVID, which, by the way, HHS has been pushing and has now established a standard for, and has been working with the National Business Group on Health and others to actually promote, sort of
Amazon selling now.
Yeah. Well, the question is that going to happen? Is that going to continue to happen? Are we going to see, in the regular testing, or are we going to basically say, you're vaccinated, you're okay, we don't have to worry about that? And or is that going to, interestingly, have a knock-on effect where people start getting home tested for all kinds of stuff that currently goes to Quest or LabCorp as part of the general move towards getting care outside of facilities as a whole? That's one of those sort of processes from COVID. That's an interesting thing to.
Right. That's what I think. I think we were going that way even before COVID. I know I was, because again, I have 2 kids and they would get strep a lot. And I found out a couple years before actually the whole pandemic that I could get some tests on Amazon. Now, mind you, I could test my kids even if I knew they were positive. I still had to take them into the doctor to get them tested again to take care of it. But at least it allowed me to do that first line of sort of defense or thinking to know whether to just give them a whole bunch of chicken soup or address it in another way.
Well, this is where the absence of trust comes in and messes things up, because I think, right now testing volume is plummeting because people don't think there's any risk. Well, we know because there's going to be a reservoir of a couple billion unvaccinated people that this thing is going to continue mutating until it comes back. And that's a when, not a whether it comes back. And so I think there's going to be a bimodal distribution. There's going to be a very large group of people that don't give a shit, who think it's over, and there's no risk, and they're not going to use the test. And then there's going to be another group of people at the other end that are sort of like me, which is really, like we said, zero trust in my fellow man. That's going to be like, how can I protect myself from all these idiots? And it isn't going to be a consistent, it's not going to be a satisfying, consistent societal response, I don't think.
Yeah, and that's happening in a lot of places. I mean, we'll see. I'm still interested to see how some of the countries which managed the sort of the COVID rollout. That's the wrong word. It was not a rollout. The COVID.
Oh, yes, it was.
Well, there was a rollout of COVID. I guess if we are virus, if we are viruses ourselves and admiring that virus for how well it did, right? But if you look at the countries like Vietnam, South Korea, Singapore. To some extent China, although it's unclear as to how they managed it, and Taiwan, which may be going to over China any minute apparently as well. They've been behind in getting the vaccines in general, and so it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out with those countries. Whether they get those vaccines on a more sort of uniform basis, or whether they have the sort of the various spread that we have here, and that you're starting to see, I think, a little bit picking up in some parts of Europe. So it's still, to me, fascinating. But I guess one of the things that I also looked at was, there was a great piece by Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz, the VC, talking about, something which is, I guess, relatively obvious, but wasn't it great if we had to have a pandemic, it happened now rather than 25 years ago, because at least we could, we developed the DNA, RNA technology to develop a vaccine very quickly and do what Moderna and Pfizer, BioNTech did. But B, we have Zoom, we have the internet, we have broadband. At least people in the rich West who have the money and have the facilities could stay at home and manage their lives. And really, a lot of companies, as he said in his piece, manage this without a heartbeat, right? Companies who were already knowledge workers and a lot of stuff that I guess the five of us do in our spare time really didn't miss much of a beat while this went on. Now, clearly not true if you're a cruise ship, a nursing home, a restaurant chain, or whatever, that where physical things have to happen. But to some extent, you could argue that we were lucky that the science had got us to where it was in the last 20 years that we do this. But as you point out, Jeff, that's come with it's come with a fraction. It's certainly come with exposing the differences between different parts of this country and different countries in the world as to how people are, thinking about their trust in their fellow man and how they regard trust in government. And had we been in a 5-year process to get a vaccine rather than a 1-year process to get a vaccine, this might have got it. This might continue to get very ugly. So, if you're right, if we come back, if there are mutations that these current vaccines don't work for, and we can't get booster shots for, we might still be in this worst situation for a long time.
Well, you know what, Matthew? Climate change might get us first. So, we can just get totally depressed and say, wow, we were given a chance and as humans, and we are blowing it.
Well, obviously,
I'm blessed to be sitting in the, probably the 6-week period between the end of winter, when the weather's nice enough.
Fires are going to get you
for the fires that are coming my way in California,
and then an earthquake. So forget that. But obviously,
you're predicting earthquakes now, Lygeia. You buying beachfront property in Arizona again?
I was just going to say,
plot of Superman again, right?
Obviously, we've seen major pandemics play out in the past, maybe not in our lifetimes, but it's not as if we haven't been hit as a society by things like the bubonic plague and the flu of 1918 and other things that were devastating and knocked out a significant swath of the population. So yes, we personally are lucky, not only because, we got a vaccine quickly, but also we're all lucky enough to have Zoom and be able to carry on with our lives in that way. But many others didn't fare so well, even this time round.
Absolutely, and that's still going on, of course, right? Even though, bizarrely, in places where it's been really bad, like India, the numbers are now coming back down again. Some of it's vaccine-related, but some of it is not, So I think it's been remarkable for many reasons, not good, and not many of them good last 18 months. But there has been, it was worth pointing out there was incredible progress made over the past couple of decades, and that helped us get through where we are. But it's still, I'm still just staggered that, vaccination became this big political issue. It's just, used to think about the anti-vax crowd on the kids front as being a very small minority that was semi-barking mad, and
we had political leadership that fanned the flames. We've been over this ground before, and so things were much worse than they needed to be. We had somebody like Biden in charge 4 years ago, it would have been a completely different picture.
But part of the reason why you had Trump in there in the first place was because of the lack of trust that Jane talked about earlier. And it's a very broad-based, flexible, societal lack of trust. And there's 100+ million Americans that don't trust anybody, even Fox News. So, I think we need some wins here. we need to rebuild our sense that our social institutions actually help us. And maybe our batting average will go up the next time when this happens again.
I think that's Jeff trying to end us on an optimistic note.
I don't know the research, but I think people do trust someone. It may not be a leader like at the elevated national level or even a state level, but their church, or their neighbor, or there's not like completely zero trust.
Right. It's just a real small circle.
it's a small circle. And so that is a communications challenge. But as I'm working with folks for the so-called hard to reach population on vaccination, and we're looking at every strategy of communication, and it all comes back to trust,
Right.
but it's got to be someone who looks like me, lives like, sounds like me,
Thinks
and
like
whoever
me.
the me is. And so that's a lot of different messengers. But that's where I'm at right now.
There is this attempt right now to say that, 96% of we trust the doctor, 96% of doctors have got vaccinated. I don't know who the 4% who haven't been, who haven't got it. But and you're looking at healthcare workers as a whole. I know that Houston Methodist has, kicked out the 100 or so people who wouldn't get vaccine, but they have, whatever it was, 30,000 people who did get vaccinated. So it seems to me that, that's a measure that may kind of work. And then you had Obama talking about, coming out and talking to Charles Barkley and Shaq about Tuskegee, and how, don't forget, under Tuskegee, when the Tuskegee experiment was made, it was white people preventing black people from getting medicine, not forcing it upon them. So you could argue back and forth that those attempts continue to be made. It seems to me that you've got a significant societal problem, and if you've got places like Florida where they will not only say, not force you to get past immunization, to force you, but they will force to try to stop businesses, and others inquiring about, being able to quote unquote protect themselves and their own employees and customers. It's tough to imagine how we get, yes, there'll be trust. It's tough to imagine how we get there. And like I said, Jeff is dead right. We end up with the question is, do we have a variant that we, that comes out and really bites us all in the arse, and that's going to be, very, very scary. I'm just hoping that, we can get at least the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines for kids approved, or at least the emergency use approved, as soon as possible, so that we can at least get the most school kids done, and then that's a big group which has been left out, and hopefully we'll be okay. All right, now I'm sounding more pessimistic as well. Because somebody got something to say before we end here. Somebody give us some good news.
Well,
Okay.
I was really impressed today. Sorry, Rosemarie. I was really impressed today with Fauci coming out and saying, we actually need antiviral medicine. So we need, we need to finish the job. I mean, we can't just rely on, we can't just rely on vaccination to solve this. And we've got this huge population, perhaps 15 or 20 million people that are going to be long COVIDs that we need solutions to. I do see a lot of energy being put into both of these things, and I think that's a very positive thing that we all should be encouraging. We're not finished with this.
Rosemarie, and then we'll go around the horn to wrap up.
Okay. Well, COVID's going to give a lot more people a pre-existing condition, which all ties back to where we started with the ACA. I hope is here to stay. And it is protecting all of the 100+ million of us and growing number that have pre-existing conditions. So I can kind of tie those together and say that this is a good sort of solid step forward. The thing I wanted to note for just this week is Juneteenth, which has just been recognized, signed, I think, while we're talking here by President Biden as a national holiday, and voted in by 100% of the Senate. And
Wow,
that is absolutely, I thought, that is absolutely remarkable. Because when you think about the attention that Juneteenth got last year after the murder of George Floyd, and people saying, is this just okay? And then there were all the protests, but then cynics could say, well, then we're just going to forget about it. I think this is a step that helps to solidify our attention on these really important matters that have been too long ignored and weren't even taught back when I was in school and studying history. So I see that as a huge positive for this week. That will be Saturday.
Fantastic. Jeff, your closing thoughts.
Fisher cut bait on the rest of Biden's agenda. I mean, he's basically, the clock's running out, and he's going to have to make some decisions. How much of this can I get done with Republican support, if any, and how much support inside the Democratic Party do I have for my own agenda? So I think there's going to be a Fisher cut bait thing here in the next couple of weeks, and it'll be really interesting to see. I hope he doesn't flinch.
Lygeia.
I, as I mentioned, live in Washington, D.C., and we've been celebrating Juneteenth for years in a very big way. So it's going to be a super huge holiday here. So that is in my near-term horizon. And I think that's awesome news.
And Jane, last to wrap up, what are you looking for in the next few weeks?
I'm looking forward to dinner parties with friends in my house where I'm cooking and hugging vaccinated people.
Awesome.
And I have my first in-person meeting with a big drug company in central New Jersey. I'm sorry, Jeff, it's not Montana. These are people who are vaccinated, and there's herd immunity in the 40 of us. But I'm thinking about you. And I'm trying to get back to, as Rosemarie was talking about, some next normal for myself, and hoping to move back to Europe in middle August, because Belgium is now vaccinated in good numbers. But you know, it's a long haul, and I think I'm going to be wearing a mask in October, November, December to stem the flu, because the flu will come back here, and we can't. You know, we have to be vigilant about that. Just the flu. So I'm like positive for my bubble, and I'm concerned about the onion skin a few layers bigger than me. So, you know, keeping a balance.
All right, I will, thanks for that. I will leave you with a thought which I just had, which is that I've been hoping this forever, that, you know, we should be figuring out how to get to a 4-day work week, because, you know, at some point we should be trying to figure that out. And there are probably a bunch of other people who deserve you know, holidays named after them. Or so I think that gets us to 13 federal holidays, 14 federal holidays, something like that, with Juneteenth. So that gives us another, what, you know, 38 or something to go. So let's, I want to take every Friday off for the rest of my life. I may be taking tomorrow off for the England-Scotland game, but we'll see. We'll discuss that later. Right, so that has brought us to the end of another THCB Gang. I want to thank my guests, Jeff Goldsmith, holding up the end from Virginia there, Lygeia Ricciardi, all the way from Washington, D.C., Rosemarie Day, we just lost Rosemarie from Massachusetts, and great to have Jane Sarasohn-Kahn back from Philadelphia. Matthew Holt signing off from Marin County, California, not wherever this nice beach is behind me. It's a fake. I've been downstairs in the basement where it's cool today. It's a hot day up here. Looking forward to seeing you all, whether you're listening on the podcast or watching this on the video. We will be back a week from today with our THCB Gang, same place, same time, June, that'll be June the 24th, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m.